In the dusty town of Dry Creek, old miner Jed Calloway had been mocked for years over his pointless trips to an abandoned mine. The loudest voice among the mockers was Bobby Clark, the mayor's self-assured son, convinced Jed's stubbornness was nothing but wasted time. But one day that same stubbornness turned into a move no one saw coming, and the whole town fell silent in awe. Just wait until you hear the shocking twist to this story, and why justice in the end came out on top. The sun hung low and heavy over Dry Creek, spilling gold light across the warped boardwalk and cracked window panes. Heat shimmered above the dirt road, turning the air into a wavering mirage. A slow creak from the saloon sign broke the stillness, its chains groaning with each lazy swing in the faint breeze that never brought any real relief. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then lay back in the shade, too tired to care about anything moving. Jed Calloway came into view, walking the way he always did, slow, deliberate, every step set into the dust as if he were staking a claim. His hat brim shaded his eyes, his boots scuffed and cracked from years of wear. A canvas sack dangled from his right hand, its bottom sagging just enough to show there was almost nothing inside. His coat, faded and frayed at the cuffs, seemed one strong wind away from falling apart. On the porch of the general store, Travis, the barkeep, leaned against a weathered post, sipping from a chipped mug. Beside him stood Hank, the blacksmith, arms folded across a barrel chest, a streak of soot down one cheek. Bobby Clark, the mayor's son, lounged with one boot propped on the rail, his shirt pressed, his hair slick with care. Bobby had that polished look of a man who'd never known hard work, and he liked to make sure everyone else knew it too. "Hey, Jed," Bobby called, letting his voice carry over the heat-hushed street. "You out looking for gold or just hunting for a good spot to take a nap?" The others chuckled, not so much out of malice as out of habit. In Dry Creek, old Jed was part of the scenery, something to point at, talk about, maybe laugh over while passing the time. Jed didn't break stride. His eyes stayed forward, fixed on the far end of the street where the road dipped toward the hills. His boots crunched in the grit, steady as a clock, as if their laughter had never reached him. He wasn't one for answering questions, especially from boys who thought the world began and ended at the saloon doors. Most folks figured Jed was just another stubborn remnant of the gold rush, too proud or too foolish to admit the glory days were over. But behind the lines on his face and the slow weight of his steps was something they couldn't see, a reason that pulled him out toward the hills each morning and a promise he'd never spoken out loud. The trail to the old mine wound through scrubland baked under a merciless sun. Sagebrush and mesquite clung to the rocky soil, their shadows sharp against the ground. Insects hummed in the heat, their droning the only sound besides the steady crunch of Jed Calloway's boots. Every so often he paused, scanning the horizon as if expecting someone to follow, then pressed on toward the jagged hills that rose like the worn teeth of some ancient creature. The entrance to the mine was little more than a dark wound in the rock framed by weathered beams that leaned under their own weight. Rusted tools lay scattered where men had dropped them decades ago. The air there was cooler, carrying the faint scent of earth and minerals. Jed rested one hand on the beam, feeling the rough grain beneath his fingers, before ducking into the shadows. Inside, the daylight faded fast, swallowed by the narrow tunnel. Jed's lantern flickered to life, casting its glow over walls streaked with quartz and veins of dull metal. The ground was uneven, littered with splinters of rock. Somewhere deeper in the mine, a slow drip of water echoed like a clock marking time no one kept. He'd worked this place before, years back, when the hills were alive with men chasing dreams. It had taken more than gold to keep them there. It had taken grit, luck, and a willingness to risk walking in and not walking back out. Jed knew that risk better than most. He still remembered the day the tunnel gave way, remembered the roar of falling stone and the sudden silence that followed. He remembered, too, the friend he couldn't reach in time. His lantern's light caught on something ahead, not the dull shine of ore, but a pale glint with an almost glassy sheen. Jed stepped closer, brushing away dust with the back of his glove. The surface was hard, cold, and streaked through with white veins of quartz. As he worked away more debris, the shape began to reveal itself, rounded, solid, too large to be just another loose chunk of rock. Jed stepped back, measuring it with his eyes. The thing was massive, as tall as his chest and nearly as wide. It sat wedged in the earth like it had been waiting for someone stubborn enough to find it. Under the lantern light, the quartz veins shimmered faintly, catching gold-like flecks deep inside. Getting it out would take more than a strong back. It would take days, maybe weeks, bracing beams, clearing a path, making sure the mine wouldn't collapse around him. Any other man would have cursed, left it, and gone home. Jed just studied it in silence, the corner of his mouth tightening into something that wasn't quite a smile. Out in the world, the townsfolk would be leaning on porch rails, swapping jokes at his expense. They thought he was chasing ghosts. But down here, in the stillness, Jed knew different. This was what he'd been walking toward every morning, what had kept his boots on the trail and his hands raw. The mine groaned faintly above him, a sound like distant thunder. Jed glanced upward, testing the air, then turned back to the stone. He set down his lantern, flexed his fingers, and began to work. Jed Calloway returned to the mine at first light the next day, carrying a bundle of wooden beams across his shoulder. The trail was still cool from the night, but the air inside the shaft was heavy, unmoving, and smelled faintly of damp stone. He set his lantern in its place, the glow pushing back the darkness just far enough to see where to step. The massive boulder sat where he had left it, its quartz veins catching the flicker of light like frozen lightning. Jed stood there for a long moment, taking its measure again. It wasn't going to give itself up without a fight. He started with the bracing. One by one, he wedged beams into the low ceiling, driving them into the earth with steady strikes. Each hit echoed down the tunnel, followed by the soft crumble of dust. The mine groaned from time to time, a sound deep and low, as if the ground itself resented him being there. Hours passed in the dim glow. Jed's shirt clung to his back, his arms ached from swinging the pickaxe, and the raw edge of calluses burned in his palms. He cleared stone in careful layers, never pulling too much at once. A collapse would bury not only the boulder, but him with it, and the hills didn't give second chances. More than once he stopped to listen. A faint rustle, the slow trickle of water, the settling sigh of timber. He knew the language of a mine well enough to hear warning in it. At one point, a thin line of grit fell from the ceiling and landed on his shoulder. He froze, scanning the supports, and only when he was certain they would hold did he keep going. By midday, he had carved a path wide enough to drag the stone through, at least in theory. Moving it was another matter. He looped thick rope around its base, knotting it tight, then braced himself and pulled. The boulder shifted just enough to let out a grinding noise like teeth against teeth. Jed exhaled slowly, set his boots firm in the dirt, and pulled again. The work was slow, almost maddening, but Jed never rushed. Every inch was earned, every sound from the mine noted and weighed. Sweat ran down his temples, catching in the creases of his weathered face, but there was a strange steadiness in his eyes, the look of a man who had already decided he would finish, no matter how long it took. The sun was setting by the time he left the mine, his shoulders bowed, his steps heavy. Behind him, in the half-light of the tunnel, the boulder sat a little closer to the entrance than it had that morning. It wasn't much, but to Jed, it was enough. Tomorrow he would be back. Morning in Dry Creek began as it always did. The sun crept over the ridge, spilling pale gold light across the rooftops. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in slow rhythm. Doors opened, boots scuffed across boardwalks, and the smell of coffee drifted from the cafe near the livery stable. It was just another day, or so everyone thought. A faint rattle of iron wheels broke the usual morning sounds. At first, no one paid it much mind. Travis, leaning on the saloon's doorway, glanced down the road with little interest. Hank paused mid-swing at his anvil, tilting his head to catch the noise again. Then they saw him. Jed Calloway was coming up the main street, walking behind a flatbed cart hitched to no horse. The handles strained under the weight of what sat on it, a shape so large it nearly filled the cart's frame. Rope crisscrossed over it, holding it steady as the wheels bumped over ruts in the road. Jed's boots dug into the dirt with each step, his shoulders bowed, but there was no hesitation in his pace. The townsfolk began to drift toward the street. Curiosity pulled them from porches and shop doors. By the time Jed passed the mercantile, a small crowd had formed, moving alongside him. Bobby Clark stood at the edge of the group, arms folded, the hint of a smirk ready on his face. "What's he got there?" someone muttered. "Looks like a rock," another said, half laughing. But as the cart rolled into the open space of the town square, the early light hit the boulder. Veins of quartz lit up under the sun, running through the stone like frozen rivers. And deep inside, faint but unmistakable, flecks of gold caught the light and sent it flashing back into the eyes of everyone watching. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the air seemed to still. Jed didn't say a word. He wheeled the cart to the center of the square, set the brake, and stepped back. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the murmurs began, low at first, then louder, rippling through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Someone asked how he'd done it. Another asked how long he'd been working on it. No one had answers. Not even Travis or Hank, who had watched him pass through town nearly every day. Bobby's smirk had faded. His eyes shifted from the boulder to Jed, then back again, as if trying to piece together how the old man he'd mocked could have pulled something like this from the earth. Jed met no one's gaze. He simply adjusted his hat, turned, and began walking toward the far edge of town, leaving the cart and the weight of what it held, for them to make of it what they would. The sun was dipping low when Jed Calloway reached the edge of Dry Creek. Behind him, the square was still crowded, the hum of voices riding the cool evening air. They spoke in half whispers, as if afraid to break whatever spell had settled over the place. The boulder stood at the center like a monument the earth had been holding onto for generations, its quartz veins catching the last fire of the day, glowing in streaks that looked almost alive. Jed's boots carried him up the narrow path to his porch. The boards welcomed him with their familiar creak, each one a note in a tune he'd heard for decades. He set his hat on the railing and brushed the dust from his sleeve. The chair was waiting, same old tilt, same worn slats, and when he lowered himself into it, the woods sighed like an old friend glad to see him home. From here, he could just make out the trail that vanished into the hills, a faint thread of pale earth cutting between dark ridges. Anyone else might have thought it led nowhere, but Jed knew every bend, every stretch where the wind cut sharp, every rise that burned the legs. That trail had carried him toward the mine more times than he could count, and now it lay quiet under the falling night. In town, the talking would already be taking shape. By now, someone would be telling it as a tale of fortune, maybe a hidden gold pocket, maybe a lucky strike. Others would swear it was planned all along, that they'd suspected he was onto something. It didn't matter. The truth wasn't the kind that fit into a neat story. It was made of hours no one had seen, of days spent in the dark with the earth pressing close, of work that asked for more than strength and paid nothing until the very end. The wind shifted, carrying with it the sharp, rhythmic clang of Hank's hammer. Somewhere beyond that, a door swung open and shut. Boots thudded on wooden planks, and the low hum of voices spilled from the saloon. The sound felt different now. For years, it had carried a tone he knew too well, the easy humor of men certain they'd figured another man out. Tonight, it held something quieter, caution maybe, or respect. Jed let his gaze drift back toward the town. From this distance, he could see only shapes moving in the square. He imagined the boulder still catching the last of the sun, holding it there as if unwilling to give it up. It would outlast him. It would stand in that square long after the story of how it got there had been polished smooth by retelling. And that suited him fine. He reached for the small tin on the porch rail, opened it, then closed it again, leaving it untouched. His hands were still marked from the rope, the lines raw against the skin. He flexed his fingers once, feeling the ache travel up into his forearms, a slow, steady throb that told him the work was real and finished. The hills were sinking into shadow now, their ridges fading into the purple of evening. A hawk traced a last lazy circle above them before gliding out of sight. Jed leaned back, the chair tipping just enough to let his shoulders rest. He listened as the quiet settled over the land, broken only by the distant calls of night birds. Some victories didn't need a crowd. Some were best left to stand on their own, like that boulder, silent, immovable, carrying its own weight without complaint. As the final edge of sunlight slid behind the ridge, painting the sky in streaks of copper and deep rose, Jed Calloway closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt no pull toward the mine. Let it rest. Tonight, the hills could keep their secrets. He had done what he came to do.